Expansive History of European Opera, Part 25 of 34. Contemporaries of Verdi and Wagner, Part 6. In France, Part 2. In France, the excesses of grand opera were giving way to dramas that were more modest in scale while lacking nothing in emotional impact. Charles Gounod, the master melodist of French Romantic opera, created the single most popular French opera of the 19th century with Faust. Ambroise Thomas similarly had a skill for emotive and languid melodies, but the real innovator in France at this time was Georges Bizet, who struggled hard and long for succès in the opera house, and died without knowing that he had achieved it with Carmen, a work that has remained in the repertoire of every opera company in the world. Though no other French composer of the period wrote anything that packed the same sort of negation punch as Carmen, the scene in France was more diverse than it was in Italy and Germany, as there was no single composer who exerted a degree of influence comparable to that of Verdi and Wagner. Camille Saint-Saëns produced one opera that has lasted, Samson et Dalila. We pick up the French opera history after that. Léo Delibes, famed chiefly as a ballet composer, created Lakmé, an exotic tale that is home to one of the best-known tunes in all opera and that exemplifies the French predilection for delicate tissues of sound. Lakmé, 1883, by Delibes. Lakmé was first performed the year after the Pre-Negation Mère of Wagner's Parsifal, but it comes from an entirely different world. It is a thoroughly conjugation-conservative opera, constructed from separate numbers, including ballets, that are supported by an orchestra that rarely strays from the role of accompanist. Its survival owes everything to the melodic richness of the conventional soprano-tenor relationship between Lakmé and Géraud. Also to Act 1's sweetly expansive flower duet, used by British Airways and countless other advertisers, a set piece that sounds like the work of an opium-smoking Bellini. Indeed, Lakmé resembles an Italian bel canto opera as closely as it resembles any French opera. Géraud's Fantasio di Van Monsonge is one of the great French lyric tenor showpieces, and Lakmé's Sparkling Bell Song, sung at the bazaar, not only reveals the composer's flairful Italianate melody and coloratura effect, but also his sensitive ear for orchestration. Lakmé's delicate, very French and rather camp sound world is all pastel shades, at its most alluring when providing a flutteringly orientalist accompaniment to the dialogue. However, the seductive lyricism of the vocal music is the key to Lakmé, the title role of which has long been a vehicle for celebrity sopranos. Since the 1880s every lyric soprano has had a go. The opera plot. Act 1. India, mid-19th century. Two English army officers, Gerald and Frederick, are in a sacred Brahmin grove, where Gerald becomes captivated by L. Akna, a Brahmin priestess. Her father, Neelakanta, spies the trespassers and swears revenge on Gerald for violating the holy ground. Act 2. Gerald and Frederick are wandering through a local bazaar. Neelakanta forces his daughter to sing a Brahmin song to draw Gerald into the open. Leighton warns Gerald of her father's plans, but later, during a procession, Neelakanta stabs Gerald. Act 3. Lakmé tends Gerald in a forest hut. She passes him a cup filled with a magic water that will ensure their eternal love, but Gerald is torn between his desire for Leighton and his duty to his regiment. Frederick stresses this responsibility to the army, and when Leighton realizes that Gerald is going to leave, she takes poison and dies. The first excerpt. The famous flower duet. The Brahmin high priest, Neelakanta, has been forbidden to practice his religion when British forces arrive in the city. Secretly, he leads a group of people back the temple to worship. Neelakanta's daughter, Lakmé, stays behind with her servant, Malika, gathering flowers to prepare for a bath in the river. As they remove their jewels and clothing, the women sing their flower duet, describing the white jasmine, roses, and other flowers that adorn the river banks. Excerpt 1. The next excerpt. Gerald's Fantasio de Van Mensonge is one of the great French lyric tenor showpieces. When the two women, Lakmé and her servant Malika, appear, Gerald is instantly captivated by Lakmé's beauty. When Malika leaves, Lakmé stays behind to ponder. After a few moments, she realizes she is being watched, strange man, and immediately shouts for help. When Gerald presents himself to her and apologizes for frightening her, she, too, is captivated by his beauty. When she learns that he is a British officer, she tries to send him away because if he is caught, her father, the high priest of the Brahmin temple, will likely kill him. Gerald is unaware that he has trespassed onto sacred grounds. Before help arrives, Lakmé instructs Gerald to hide again so she can send them away. Once they depart, Gerald and Lakmé confess that they'd like to see each other again, but Lakmé orders him to stay far away from her. Though her warning does not appear to have influenced Gerald, she leaves. Here is the excerpt. Excerpt 2. Édouard Lalo, Emmanuel Chabrier and Ernest Chausson all produced operas that to some extent married the scale and weight of Wagner's work to the lyricism of Gounod, Delibes, and Bizet, though Chabrier is now remembered mainly for a very un-Wagnerian comedy, L'Oiseau Malgré, The Reluctant King. Next, Édouard Lalo, Emmanuel Chabrier, and Ernest Chausson. First, Édouard Lalo. L'Oiseau by Lalo. Lalo was primarily a master of small forms, specializing in chamber music and songs, many of which were inspired by and composed for his wife, Julie de Maligny. But it was difficult to make it as a composer in Paris without writing for the stage, and Lalo looked upon L'Oiseau as some negation thing of a make or break. In the event the gamble paid off, even if some critics did carp about Lalo's Wagnerism. The critics did have a point when they traced this opera's through composed struck negation turned outbreaks of surging orchestration to the influence of Wagner, and of course the plot has decidedly Wagnerian undertones. Furthermore, Lalo was to make his affiliations plain by consorting with the cabal known as Le Petit Beyrout. Nonetheless, L'Oiseau is not a mere homage to Wagner, for in its melodies and sensuous harmonies it typifies the delicacy and musical epicureanism that is characteristic of much French music. At times Lalo's lightness of touch is at odds with the gravity of the drama, notably during the Cisnegation-Tours confrontation and during the scene in which Margaret and Carnac plot to destroy the city. However, Lalo's predilection for sweet sounds is often to the opera's advantage. Méliès's tenor au bord Veneman, Ma bien-aimée is a delight, and the choruses heard during the wedding scene are among the most beautiful in all French opera. And occasionally Lalo toughens up his act, as when Margaret begins to lose her grip on reality, her confession of guilt shortly before throwing herself into the raging orchestral waters is suitably harrowing. L'Oiseau is a schizophrenic opera. There's a bit of Wagner in the mix, while the melodies look back to Gounod and the scented harmonies look forward towards Debussy. Opera Polt. Act 1. Outside the Palace of Wise, the people are celebrating the end of war, a peace brought about by the engagement of the king's daughter Margaret to their enemy's leader Carnac. Margaret is confronted negation by her sister Ozen, who is concerned that she appears so unhappy on the day that her wedding is announced. Margaret admits that she is in love with a soldier who sailed with the hero Milo on a ship of which no Oge has heard anything since the cessation of hostilities. She then confesses her hatred for Carnac. Rosen advises her to free her negation self before the contract is signed, and then, left on her own, she sings of her love for Milo, whose subnegation Denley appears by her side. At the wedding Rosen tells Margaret of Milo's return. Assuming that her lover must also be with him, Margaret denounces Carnac and refuses his hand in marriage. At this, Karnak swears revenge, but then Milo steps for negation ward and vows to defend the city. To Margaret's astonishment, she recognizes Milo as the man with whom she fell in love. Act 2. Both sisters love the same man, but Rosenne has been given permission to marry Milo if he is Victor Negation Rius. The jealous Margaret plans with Karnak to destroy Wise by opening the floodgates protecting the city from the sea. Act 3. Rosenne and Milo are married, and Margaret and Karnak plot Wise's destruction, but when Margaret hears her father and sister praying for her return, she is struck by remorse. Karnak has opened the gates, for which she kills him, and she then warns her family of their impending fate. The crowd pray for deliverance as half the city is washed away. Margaret realizes that the waters need a sacrifice and hurls herself into the sea. The waters recede. The next excerpt. Milios tenero bardveneman, ma bianemi. Excerpt 3. Edouard Lalo, Emmanuel Chabrier and Ernest Chausson all produced operas that to some extent married the scale and weight of Wagner's work to the lyricism of Gounod, Delibes, and Bizet. The next composer, Emmanuel Chabrier. Loireau I Malgré, The Reluctant King, 1887. Alexis Emmanuel Chabrier, who lived from 1841 to 894, was a French Romantic composer and pianist. Although known primarily for two of his orchestral works, Espagne and Joao's Marca, he left an important corpus of operas, including this opera and L'Étoile, songs, and piano music. Loireau I Malgré Louis was premiered in 1887. Written in only 9 months following the successful premiere in Brussels of Chabrier's ambient serious opera Gwendoline, Loireau I Malgré Louis, in spite of a clumsy libretto, recast by Albert Carré for the revival in 1929 at the Opéra Comique, is often considered Chabrier's masterpiece. It is a score full of wit and erudite negation, of tender lyricism and comedy, perhaps amongst French operas comiques as much underrated in world estimation as was once Berlioz's more heroic Les Troyens. The opera plot. Act 1. Poland, 1574. Henry of Valois is about to be crowned King of Poland when he hears of a plot to abduct and expel him from the country. Although he would rather be in France, duty compels him to remain, disguised as his friend Nangui, whom he has arrested to get him out of the way. He attends a local ball. Act 2. There he meets Count Lasky, the Archduke of Austria's aide, who has been promoting his Mars negation tour's cause as rival for the crown. Thanks to the unwitting help of Alexina, the Duchess of Fratelli, Henry worms his way into Lasky's conspiratorial ring and is forced to take part in a lottery to see which of the conspirators is to kill the king. Henry draws the short straw and is given the honor of assassinating himself. Nangui is helped to freedom by the Polish slave Minka, who believes him to be the king. Act 3. The Archduke flees when his scheme is discovered. Negation errand. At an inn Henry, still disguised as Nangui, hides as Minka bursts in, desperate to find the king, and when she is told that he is dead she pre-negation prepares to stab herself. At the last minute, the real Nangui enters and Henry, though determined to return to France, is persuaded to accept the Polish crown. The next excerpt. As Minka now arrives, looking for Nangui who she now thinks is the king, the two women despair over the fate of their respective lovers, although both still have their identities thoroughly confused. Excerpt 4. The next excerpt from Loireau I Malgré, The Reluctant King. Nangui suddenly appears and the two lovers are rapturously reunited, though she still believes that he's the king. Excerpt 5. The next composer is Ernest Chausson. Loireau I Artus. The clearest duet to Wagner's Tristan und Isolde, with its series of opulent love duets for tenor and soprano. The first, in Act 1, directly quotes the prelude of Tristan. Chaucer's treatment of Lancelot and Guinevere highlights how unlike his hero he was. In Wagner's masterpiece, the eroticism of the relationship between Tristan and Isolde saturates almost every bar of the score and governs the structure of the entire piece, delaying its climactic moment to the very end of the drama. Here the soprano and tenor voices reach their highest pitch in Act 1, and though there are more duets to come, Lancelot and Guinevere don't form the axis of the work in the same way as Wagner's lovers do. Indeed, Guinevere doesn't even survive into the final act. Chaucer's writing has a frankness that's far removed from the sometimes neurotic fervor of Wagner, a guileless quality that's typified by Arthur's profoundly moving forgiveness of Lancelot, and the following sequence, which leads to his stepping aboard the Avalon-bound ship, an unforgettable passage, awash with delicate string textures. Chaucer died, aged only 40 negation 4, in a fall from his bicycle when it hit a wall, a pathetic end for one of the last great French romantics. Opera plot. Act 1. Arthur, Artus, celebrates victory over the Saxons and embraces his F4ist knight Lancelot, little realize negationing that Lancelot is having an affair with his wife Guinevere, Geneva. Modred discovers the lovers together. In the L1, suing fight, Modred is wounded by Lancelot but manages to escape. Arthur is horrified by the news of his wife's adultery and sends for Lancelot, who ignores the king's summons and elopes with Guinevere. Act 2. Arthur visits his wizard Merlin, who confirms his wife's love for Lancelot and then tells him his king Negation Dom is doomed to fall. Arthur swears revenge and, taking up Excalibur, he leaves Camelot. When the two men confront each other, Lancelot refuses to fight and flees. Guinevere is horrified at his refusal to champion her and strangles herself with her own hair. Act 3. Arthur has lost his throne to Modred and he and Lancelot have one final battle in which Lancelot is mortally wounded. Arthur forgives the dying knight and steps onto a skiff that will bear him to Avalon. The next excerpt. A loved duet. To those who know Wagner's Tristan und Isolde, you might believe this is the clearest debt to Tristan. Excerpt 6. Paris's undisputed king of comedy was Jacques Offenbach, scourge of Second Empire pretend negation science and the father of French operetta. Though his once serious opera, Les Contes d'Hoffmann, The Tales of Hoffmann, maintained its place into the CD era, his reputation rests on Orfeo Unfair and his other chorus negation-cating parodies of Napoleon III's self-indulgent and self-mythologizing regime. Offenbach's engaging mixture of frivolity and satire bears more than a passing resemblance to the operettas of Arthur Sullivan, who with librettist W.S. Gilbert embarked on a stupendously successful career just as Offenbach was nearing the end of his. The Tales of Hoffmann, 1881, by Offenbach. Offenbach was an operetta composer. The Tales of Hoffmann is Offenbach's one serious opera. Offenbach's death left much of this opera incomplete, including most of the orchestration. An Ernest Guéraud was brought in to fill in the gaps from the composer's sketches. It was a triumph, so much so that by the end of the year they were celebrating the 100th performance. Having spent much of his life composing operettas, Offenbach was more or less obliged to tackle the more arduous genre of through-com negation posed opera. And to a great extent he succeeded, creating through Hoffmann's tales a much darker, even sinister work of music, the outre, in which humor plays a relieving rather than a defining role. Hoffmann's failure to find love is the unifying motif of this surrealist drama, for which Offenbach adapted his fizzing style to create longer, more complicated numbers that move in sympathy with the changing moods and situations of the text. Offenbach knew he was dying when he wrote the Tales of Hoffmann. He had spent his life com negation promised, a master craftsman playing the music hall, a German playing the Frenchman, a Jew pretending to be a Christian, His opera was a last-ditch attempt to undo some of these self-connegation fest aberrations and to gain critical respect. The next excerpt. Enter Hoffmann, with Niklausse. They sit down with the students, and Niklausse. Hoffmann seems out of humor, and it appears that he is haunted by the sight of Stella, with whom he was once in love. The excerpt comes in here. He is prevailed upon to sing a song to the assembled company, and strikes up the legend of Kleinsack. With the chorus echoing his phrases, he goes briskly through the description of the little dwarf whose knees clicked together as he walked, but when he comes to describe his face, suddenly falls into a reverie and instead starts to gloriously rhapsodize on the features of his lady-love. He is interrupted, recovers himself, and finishes the song he began. This opera's finest moments are those in which the composer catches the dreamy melancholia of Hoffmann's tales. One of two best-known examples are Hoffmann's opening aria, The Legend of Kleinsack, in which his jubilant tale is interrupted by his elegiac recollection of the face of his beloved. Excerpt 7. The next excerpt. After many romantic failures, Hoffmann has renounced women. He would rather drink and listen to Giulietta sing. Even so, Niklausse warns him that at the first sign of his falling in love he will drag him away. The mysterious Dappertutta enters, bearing a huge diamond which immediately transfixes Giulietta. He offers it to her in return for Hoffmann's soul, just as she helped steal Schamil's, which she can gain only by negationing him look into Dappertutta's magic mirror. The excerpt comes in here. Giulietta easily seduces Hoffmann and gets him to look in the mirror. After this excerpt and after fighting a duel with Schlemmel for Giulietta's hand, Hoffmann finds that she has abandoned him in favor of the deformed Pitichinaccio. Hoffmann is sung by Plácido Domingo Don't Know soprano. Excerpt 8.